Hello all. In the last lecture, we have just introduced the basic concept of the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, and we have seen already that the process itself have main four steps or parts. The first step was the identification of all potential seismic sources, while the second step was to define the seismicity of each of the seismic sources, and that seismicity is defined by a magnitude recurrence relationship. Then the third step was the selection of appropriate ground motion prediction equations, or also called as the attenuation models. They tell us the rate of decrease in the seismic hazard parameter, for example peak ground acceleration, with increasing the distance from source to site. For different magnitudes, it gives us different relationships, and they will be different for different magnitudes. They are primarily based on the actual recorded data for past earthquakes. So based on the statistical analysis of the past data, different researchers have proposed these relationships for different seismotectonic environments, and we can select an appropriate GMP and use for our site. The last step is the determination of probability of exceedance, or annual frequency of exceedance, for example, as the function of peak ground acceleration or the seismic hazard parameter or ground motion parameter. This will result in the hazard curve for our site that will tell us the value for hazard parameter for all probabilities of exceedance or for all levels of future ground shakings. So these are the four basic parts or components of the PSHA process. In this session, we will go into a bit more detail of each of these steps. So let's start with the first step, and that is the identification of all seismic sources which can contribute towards the hazard at your particular site. So where active faults have been identified and mapped, they become the sources of future earthquakes. So all the active faults which are already characterized and they are mapped and their features are already studied and are available, we can treat them or we can model them as the sources of future earthquake in our PSHA methodology. Where specific faults have not been identified or their characteristics are not well understood, it is common to define a seismic source zone. So instead of having a particular fault explicitly modeling it, we just assume that this whole area source is the source of an earthquake. So the seismic sources can be, for example, faults, and they can also be area sources. So area sources is an area where you know already that seismic activity exists because historical data show us a cluster of earthquakes in that area. But the causing faults or the actual seismic sources, they are not well characterized or not well understood. So then we treat the whole area as an area source. So the faults can be called as line source, and the area sources can be area source, or also called as the seismic source zone. So it can be a source zone also. Within the seismic source zone, the earthquakes are typically modeled either as a single point of energy release, for example a point source, or as a rupture on a fault, a finite size source with a random location and orientation. So once we define a source zone, just like this one, then we model all the earthquakes which are already available from past historical data. We can either model them as point source, or we can also model them as a rupture on a fault. In that case, it will be a finite size source. More importantly, we will consider that their location and orientation inside a particular seismic source zone is random. In such cases, the challenge of the analyst is to identify source zones in which the seismicity is relatively uniform. So given a particular study area and the historical data or instrumental data as well, the challenge is to identify the source zones, delineate the source zones, and then use them as the source of future earthquakes and to predict or forecast the level of seismicity expected in future. Even in areas where faults are well defined, a source zone may be needed to model the random occurrence of small and moderate earthquakes, for example, less than magnitude 6.5. That is called the background seismicity. So, for example, if you have this study area here on the top, and the historical seismicity pattern may be like this, and the historical earthquakes, uh, they they are just spread along this line, and let's say this is your fault, this is your fault, and it is well defined, it has characterized already, and its values and characteristics are already available. Even in those cases, there will be some earthquakes which will be randomly distributed close to the fault lines. Those earthquakes may not be attributed to this particular fault line, and once you model that fault line, you may only include some specific, for example, large magnitude earthquakes, but for moderate and low level earthquakes, you may still need an area source to model them in the PSHA process. So that area source is called the background seismicity source. Those small and moderate earthquakes are included in the analysis, their effect is included in the analysis by using an area source, and they are called the background seismicity. Generally, a threshold magnitude value, for example greater than 6.5, is used to segregate the historical earthquakes into two parts. For example, the ones which will be having a magnitude more than 6.5, they will be attributed to that particular fault. They will be used for the modeling of that fault in the PSHA process, while those having the magnitudes less than that threshold magnitude, they will be included in the area source and they will be considered the background seismicity. This way you define the seismic sources, and then you use the historical data to model those seismic sources in the PSHA process. So for example, here you can see the seismic source zones within the US in this map. So this delineation of seismic sources is done based on the patterns of historical seismicity, and also looking at the seismotectonic features or seismotectonic environment of US. So you can see here that all of these numbers are indicating the zone number, seismic source zone number, which will be modeled explicitly in the PSHA process. And this is delineated or decided set based on the historical records, historical data. Similarly, you can see here this is the seismic source zones for the PSHA of Thailand. So you can see that all of the historical data, all of these circles are past earthquakes, and their size is indicating the magnitude. So you can see a pattern in the location of these earthquakes. So based on that, and also looking at the seismotectonic environment of Thailand, this seismotectonic map of Thailand, the area sources are decided or delineated here. So the country is divided into 12 regional seismic source zones. Uh, the dots here are showing the recorded earthquakes from 1910 to year 2000, and you can see that the location of the concentration of past earthquakes is corresponding to the major tectonic faults as well as the plate boundaries. So based on that, the seismic hazard analyst is required to actually classify or divide the whole study area into different source zones. You can also model the crustal faults explicitly, but this example is showing only the area source zones for the PSHA of Thailand. This map shows the seismotectonic environment for Pakistan. Half part of the country is located on Indian plate, and the other half is located on Eurasian plate. And the relative movements, the rate of movements for both of these plates is shown here. So Indian plate, here we have a direct head-on collision with the Eurasian plate spanning over last several millions of years, and the rate is 1 to 2 centimeter per year. Similarly, here also we have a relative movement with different rates of movement between the Eurasian and Indian plates towards the south also. Here, towards the further south, we have the Arabian plate, which is subducting under the Eurasian plate. So this subduction has resulted in the formation of this whole area. We call it the Makran subduction zone. And towards the north, we have the North Korean boundary, NCB. So this is the North Korean boundary where we have the major thrust boundary, and most of the major earthquakes towards the north are located close to that plate boundary. Here we have the Koita transverse zones, another important seismotectonic feature which governs the seismicity of this part of the country. And here towards the south we have several strike slip faults, a network of those faults here which is along the main plate boundary. Most of the geological features are along this main plate boundary. So this is a very complex seismotectonic environment. Towards the north there is a thrust boundary, and then towards the south we have the strike slip faults, and also we have the Makran subduction zone towards the further south. So this complex seismotectonic environment have resulted in the formation of several active faults in this region, and they are capable of producing moderate to large magnitude earthquakes. So several major seismotectonic features are shown here in this map. It is based on the Geological Survey of Pakistan. So you can see here this Chaman fault, then Herat fault here, and then we also have for example this main boundary thrust, which is a direct thrust fault. Similarly towards the south we have the Makran subduction zone here, and all of the major geological phenomena or features are along the main plate boundary, which is passing through almost from the middle of the country. So the summary is that based on the past recorded data and historical data of earthquakes, and also based on the seismotectonic features in a particular study area, the area source zones are delineated and they are modeled as part of the PSHA process. This map shows the historical seismicity of Pakistan for earthquakes having a magnitude greater than 5. So this is for M greater than 5, and you can see each of the dots, they are showing the epicenter of all historical earthquakes, and the color of the dot shows the depth of the focus or hypocenter for each earthquake. So you can see here that most of the shallow and very shallow earthquakes, they are spread along the main plate boundary. The red line is the main plate boundary between Indian plate and Eurasian plate. And most of the deep earthquakes, intermediate and deep earthquakes, they are concentrated in the Hindu Kush region. This is the Hindu Kush region. And most of the deep earthquakes, intermediate and deep earthquakes, they are located here. So the seismicity within the country is mostly governed by the shallow crustal earthquakes, which are concentrated close to the main plate boundary, but it can also be governed in some cases by the intermediate or deep earthquakes, which are concentrated in the Hindu Kush region. This is another view of the historical seismicity of Pakistan with M greater than 5. The same observation here, but you can see here that this is the main plate boundary between Indian and Eurasian plate. So the whole line has a concentration of shallow and very shallow earthquakes. So this view is taken from the IRIS earthquake browser. You can access that at www.iris.edu. So this is one of the several useful tools which IRIS provides us for the visualization and analysis of seismic data. and they have a very useful query builder here. So you can set the priority and the maximum earthquakes, the magnitude range, the depth range also, and the view will be different. So you can check different layers which are available in that, and also the visualization of historical data. This is the same Iris earthquake browser, but now I have selected a different magnitude range, magnitude 6 plus. You can see here 6 plus. So you can see here that several large magnitude earthquakes, they are concentrated in the Hindu Kush region, but they are deep. Some of them are located close to the main plate boundary. This is for shallow earthquakes less than 30 km deep. You can see here that they are mostly here, they are concentrated along the main plate boundary, and they are also here in the Hindu Kush region and also along this plate boundary. This is for the earthquakes having the magnitude, having the depth greater than 150 km. They are mostly located in the Hindu Kush region. So based on the historical seismicity and seismotectonic environments, different studies have conducted the delineation of seismic sources for the purpose of probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. So one of them is here. So this is from the Global Seismic Hazard Assessment Program, G-SHAPE, and the aim for this project was to quantify the seismic hazard of the whole region, and Pakistan was also included in that. So several area sources which are indicated by these numbers, uh, I think these are the maximum magnitudes of earthquakes which have occurred in historical data. So these area sources are also covering the Pakistan. Another study which was conducted in 2007 by Pakistan Meteorological Department and NORSAR, which is the Norwegian Seismic Array. So you can see here that the country was divided into different source zones. So you can see here that where the historical earthquakes are higher, the size of the source zone is smaller, and where the historical earthquakes are not that much, the size of the source zone can be larger also. So also, since we know that the main plate boundary and the major seismotectonic features are along this line, along the main plate boundary, so you can expect a concentration of past earthquakes as well as the corresponding source zones along this main plate boundary. So this is an example from Pakistan. This is the source zones defined in 2007 by another study which was conducted for the purpose of seismic hazard for building code of Pakistan in 2007. So here these are the boundaries, or you can say the locations of different source zones. So instead of numbering them, they are classified by these alphabets here. So these source zones are used in this study to conduct the seismic hazard assessment of Pakistan. This is from another example, this source. This study conducted the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment of Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan. So here, based on the seismic concentration of the past earthquakes, as indicated by historical records, instrumental records, this delineation of seismic sources for the city was performed. So this number here is showing the source zone number which is considered in this study. This is another updated study by this reference, Rahman et al. And this one considered these shallow area sources, 23 in number. So the number here 1, 2, 3 are the shallow area sources, and the deep area sources were also considered in those regions where we have a major concentration of deep earthquakes in historical seismicity. So 5 deep area sources were considered for the PSHA of Pakistan in this particular study. Apart from area source zones, we can also model explicitly the fault sources. So for example, I give you this example of a study here in which the probabilistic seismic hazard of assessment of Pakistan was conducted, and beside the background seismicity or the source zones, the crustal faults were also explicitly included in the analysis. So the crustal faults, the major crustal faults for which the slip rates and the other fault geometry and characteristics are available, those were also explicitly modeled in this study and combined with the background seismicity or the area source zones to predict or forecast the future hazard level in the country. So this is a list of all of those crustal faults which were considered in this study, and they are shown here in the map, the number of fault and also the Makran subduction zone. The subduction zone is also included and explicitly modeled in this study. So the symbol here is showing the type or the focal mechanism of earthquake. The fault number 3, for example, here you can see the main boundary thrust is a thrust fault, MBT, main boundary thrust, and 2 also, salt range thrust, is a thrust fault. But here towards the south you have strike slip fault. For example, fault number 9 is the Ghazaband fault. Similarly, fault number 8 is the Chaman fault, a very famous fault, and it is a strike slip fault. So these faults were considered explicitly, they were modeled explicitly as part of this study. And apart from these crustal faults, the background seismicity was also considered, the area sources were also considered in this study. The second step is once you already identified the seismic sources or delineated the seismic source zones, after that the second step is to quantify the seismicity rate of each of those sources. So in order to model them, you have to quantify their seismicity rate, how active those sources are, how frequent you can expect the earthquakes in future from those sources. So we will quantify their seismicity rates by constructing a curve for each of the seismic source, and that curve or relationship is called the magnitude recurrence relationship. So as the name indicates that we will have the occurrence rate on y-axis, so rate of occurrence, and obviously that occurrence will be in a particular time. For example, annual rate of occurrence means in 1 year. So annual rate of occurrence may be on y-axis and the magnitude on x-axis. So if you look at the historical data, you will see that the large magnitude earthquakes are fewer in number, but the moderate to low magnitude, they are higher in number, they are more frequent. So naturally you can expect the behavior of this curve to be like this, going down, because as the magnitude is increasing maybe towards 8 or 9, maybe 8, the annual rate of occurrence reduce. But for let's say magnitude 4 or 5, you may expect a very high rate because the low magnitude earthquakes are frequent and the large magnitude earthquakes are rare. So for defining the seismicity of each seismic source, one commonly used parameter for defining it is the rate of occurrence of earthquakes larger than some lower bound number, some lower bound magnitude. And typically this lower bound magnitude is taken as the magnitude 4 because it is assumed that an earthquake having a magnitude less than this number may not produce a significant damage. So M0 is defined as the smallest earthquake expected to produce any damage. Generally it is magnitude 4. So in traditional applications of PSHA, this seismicity rate is simply estimated from the historical rate of occurrence of the earthquakes exceeding that magnitude, the threshold or minimum magnitude, which is typically 4. So we just use the historical data, past recorded data or historical records, and then we can estimate the historical rate of occurrence For each of the you can say magnitude or having an earthquake exceeding a particular magnitude, we calculate the historical rate of occurrence. We use the past data, and that is used to show how active or how less active a particular source is. So the estimate of the seismicity of a seismic source require two things. First of all, the historical accounts of the past earthquakes and the instrumental records also if they are available. So these are the two sources of you can say historical earthquake data. Another important source can be the paleoseismic investigation, and it is also a successful technique to provide information on some prehistoric fault movements and the seismicity of active faults, and then based on that study we can estimate the number and magnitude of historical earthquakes which that particular site have experienced in past. So historical written records of major earthquakes. Number two is the instrumental records, but most of the instrumental records are available after maybe 1930s or maybe 1950s. Before that, we only have their, you can say, they are represented in different historical texts or different accounts, historical accounts, and their information obviously will not be exact, but for instrumental records they are very reliable. The magnitude and location are relatively more reliable compared to historical records. The other one is the paleoseismic investigation, in which we actually dig that fault, and based on the geological study paleoseismic investigation, try to understand the relative movements or slips which have occurred in that fault in history, and those slips can be converted to the estimates of the magnitude of earthquake, and that can also be included in the analysis. So we have to first come up with a complete list of all historical earthquakes from different sources, and that process is called the development of earthquake catalog. Earthquake catalog. So earthquake catalog is a list, or you can say a comprehensive list which will become the basis of your hazard assessment, and it should be a reliable list. It should be developed with care, as well as by a careful, you can say, investigation or scrutiny of all the historical records and instrumental records and some information from the paleoseismic investigation. So one example is shown here for Pakistan. You can see here that this is a list which will go down, and the date and time of earthquake, the magnitude, the latitude and longitude of the epicenter, the depth of an earthquake, the region, and some other information also. So this catalog is developed for the seismic hazard assessment of Pakistan. So a similar list or a comprehensive database of all historical earthquakes should be developed at this stage, and that will be used to model the seismic sources, or in fact it will be used to construct the magnitude recurrence relationship for each of the seismic source in your study area. So you have to make sure that this catalog is accurate, reliable, and there is no duplication, because different international databases will record a particular seismic activity or event, and when you take data from them and combine, you have to make sure that there is no duplication, and also you have to remove the aftershocks and the foreshocks, and only keep the main shocks, because the aftershocks and foreshocks are the dependent events, but we have considered or assumed in this PSHA process that the earthquakes are randomly occurring in time. They are following the Poissonian distribution, so we only will take the main shocks. So this process of refinement of the earthquake catalog will take a lot of time, and then that will become the basis for the next step in the PSHA process. This is another example, the instrumental earthquake data for Myanmar, Thailand and Indonesia. So you can see here that this list is first telling you that from which seismic source or international database the data is taken, the year, the month, time, and then again the lat long for the epicenter, the depth of the earthquake, and some other information, different magnitudes for different scales. So this list or this earthquake catalog is used then to model the seismic sources to construct the magnitude recurrence for each of the seismic source. The third source of information about the past earthquakes is the paleoseismic investigation. So you can see here that this is the fault trenching in Taiwan. So the fault itself is you can see a trench is dig in this, and then different layers of soil and the relative movements of these layers in different times, in different historical times, can be studied, and then that information can be converted into an estimate of the historical earthquakes which that particular fault may have generated or caused in history. So another picture from the same fault trenching in Taiwan. So you can see here that this is a trace of a relative movement for one soil layer compared to the other. So seismologists conduct these kind of studies and then they publish their results, and their data can be used to estimate the to get the information about the past historical activities. So you can see here that this relative slip of this type, which is the thrust or reverse type, can be seen here or can be traced back from this digging process and from this fault trenching. So this example is from Thailand, from this city, and you can see here that the fault line is trenched, and now the different layers and their relative slips are being studied by seismologists. So the summary is that you will get the data from different sources, from historical accounts, from instrumental records, and also from, if it is available, from the paleoseismic studies. Then you combine all of that data and develop a comprehensive catalog of earthquakes. And you, as I mentioned earlier, that you have to check that catalog should be free from duplication. It should only contain main shocks, the independent events, and it should be as complete or comprehensive as possible. So this example is showing you an earthquake catalog developed for Pakistan as part of the seismic hazard assessment in one of the studies. So you can see here that the time of an earthquake is shown here by this symbol. So you can see that all of the blue marks here on this map, they are from 10 AD to 1900 CE. So all of the blue marks are basically historical earthquakes, and they are not from instrumental data. So these are historical earthquakes, so their information is only gathered from the historical accounts of earthquakes in different, you can say, texts or literature available. But from 1900s onwards, you may have some basic instrumental records or data. And then maybe from 1960s onwards or 50s onwards, you have a relatively more reliable instrumental data. The size of all of those marks are showing the magnitude. So you can see here that one observation from this map, that all of the blue marks which are historical earthquakes, they are all large magnitude earthquakes, maybe more than magnitude 7, uh, m greater than 7 maybe. So the reason is that, and by the way, you cannot see any blue dots which are smaller than, I think, magnitude 7. Most of them are all greater than magnitude 7. And the reason is that only the major earthquakes are, you can say, they have their information in different literature or historical texts. The minor earthquakes or moderate earthquakes, their information is not available in different historical records. So therefore, all the earthquakes which are historical earthquakes, they have a large magnitude. But for instrumental data, you may have large as well as small earthquakes because the instruments may be able to record low or moderate earthquakes as well. So this is an example of an earthquake catalog which is developed for the purpose of probabilistic seismic hazard assessment of Pakistan. This is the same catalog, but now the earthquakes are shown by circle, and the size of the circles are showing the magnitude, and the color is now showing the depth of the focus of these earthquakes. So blue means 0 to 25 kilometer, very shallow. 25 to 50 are the shallow earthquakes, they are red. But green means 50 to 250, so green will be for deep earthquakes. So as we have seen earlier also that they are mostly concentrated in Hindu Kush region, some here in the south also. So this information should be used to delineate the seismic sources. So the deep area sources will be located in this region and maybe in the south also, and maybe here also in the north. But you may not have a deep earthquake source maybe exactly in the middle. So the shallow area sources will be, you can say, located or spread along this whole area or whole country. So let's say that now we have the historical records or the data or a kind of a reliable complete earthquake catalog for our study region. Now we will use it to construct the magnitude recurrence relationship for each of the seismic source. So let's say that this is our study region, and in that we have this seismic source which is shown here with these lines. So this is our seismic source zone, and all of the dots or earthquakes within that source zone, they are available, they are known. We have already known their magnitude and their numbers. So using this information, we can construct the magnitude recurrence relationship for that particular source zone. Let's call it source A. So we will construct the MR relationship for this source A. Let's say that we have the 100 years of data. This is the 100 years of data. All the dots within that source A, they are just 100 years of data. So what we will do is that we will count for different magnitudes the number of earthquakes. So n of m is the number of earthquake events in a particular t years. In this case, let's say t is 100 years. So we will see, and this is an example data, that the magnitude 8 will be just one earthquake in last 100 years. Magnitude 7 can be maybe 7, 6 can be 80, 5 can be 1000, and 4 can be 6000. So these are the number of earthquakes in that historical records or data for different magnitudes. So you can see here that they are increasing exponentially as you reduce the magnitude. So magnitude 4 earthquakes in last 100 years, you have 6000, but only one magnitude 8 earthquake. What you can do is that you can calculate the annual number of events n of m for each magnitude when you divide this whole column with the total t duration, which is 100 years. So you get the annual n of m for each magnitude. You will start from the maximum earthquake magnitude which occurred in that particular source, and we go to m naught, which is the minimum earthquake or threshold magnitude below which the earthquakes will not be able to cause any significant damage. Now this annual n of m is the annual rate of occurrence. But what we can do is that we can also calculate the cumulative annual n of m, which means that for maximum, okay, we can take as it is, but for 7 we can sum this annual n of m for 7, we can sum it with 8, this one, and then we come up with the cumulative annual n of m, and again we sum this 0.8 with this number and then come up with this one. So we also calculate an annual cumulative annual n of m. Now this last column, the cumulative annual n of m, can also be called as the cumulative annual frequency, because this Annual N of M is the annual occurrence rate. It is the rate at which these magnitudes, different magnitudes are occurring or have occurred in past, and this is the annual rate because we have divided already with the total time of the data. But this cumulative column, the last column, can be called as the cumulative annual occurrence rate or cumulative annual frequency, because cumulative means that for any particular magnitude 6, this number also contains the annual frequencies or annual rates of the earthquakes having magnitude more than 6, because cumulative means that you are just summing them from top, and then 0.88 includes not only the annual rate for magnitude 6 but also for 7 and 8 also. So the cumulative means that now this last column, this cumulative number, is the annual frequency of exceedance or annual rate of exceedance, which means that this is the rate of having an earthquake, uh, not only 6 but even greater than 6, maybe 7 or 8 also. So now this number 0.88 is the rate of occurrence of an earthquake with magnitude greater than 6 and not only 6, because cumulative is adding the previous rates also. So I repeat again, because this is an important step in construction of the magnitude recurrence relationship, that when we take the cumulative annual rates, in fact what we are doing is that we are summing for one particular earthquake magnitude, we are also summing the activity rates or occurrence rates for magnitudes greater than that number. So this 0.88 means that this is the rate of occurrence of an earthquake with magnitude greater than 6 and greater than 6 in 1 year. In 1 year, because this is the annual cumulative frequency or annual cumulative rate. So that's how, using the past data, we can calculate the frequency of exceedance, the annual frequency of exceedance, and its units will be the events, number of events per year, because this is annual. So N of M is the number of events. When we divide it with the total duration and calculate the annual frequency or annual occurrence rate, it becomes number of events per year. Same is for cumulative annual also. So using this data for any particular seismic source zone A, we can construct this curve or this relationship. We can have the N of M or mean annual number of earthquakes. Maybe we can have this column, annual number of earthquakes on y-axis, and the magnitude on x-axis. So as we have studied in the start also, that this trend should be downwards, because the large magnitude earthquakes are rarer and the low magnitude earthquakes are more frequent. So that's why we will have a low number for large magnitude but a high number for low magnitude earthquakes. Now the idea is that for future forecast, we can use the same data, same trend, which is developed based on the past earthquakes data. We can use the same information for future forecast also. For example, let's come back here to the same example, that for magnitude 6, we have the annual N of M as 0.8. So what we can do is that for future also, because this 0.8 is coming from historical data, but we can use the same number for future forecast also. We can say that the probability of having an earthquake with M equal to 6 in next 1 year is 0.8 or 80%. So the same trend or the same number of earthquake or the occurrence rate which we have calculated based on the past data, we can just use the same for future also. So the probability of having an earthquake with M equal to 6 in next 1 year is 80%, which is this one. But if I say that the probability of having an earthquake with M greater than 6, in that case I will use this cumulative number, this one, because this have the occurrence rate of 6 as well as 7 and 8 also. So the probability of having an earthquake with M greater than 6 in next 1 year, and 1 year is due to this annual cumulative frequency, that probability is 0.88 or 88%. We call this as the probability of exceedance, and this concept will be used again and again in this seismic hazard assessment. So I repeat again that the cumulative annual frequency can simply tell you the probability of exceeding a particular magnitude in next 1 year. So for example, using this data, the probability of having an earthquake with magnitude greater than 7 is 8%. Similarly, having an earthquake with magnitude greater than 6 in next 1 year is 8.8%. And if this number is more than 1, which means that that particular earthquake will surely occur in next 1 year. That particular magnitude will surely occur in next 1 year. So the concept of probability of exceedance should be clear or should be understood at this stage. So we can construct the magnitude recurrence relationship. Magnitude will be on x-axis, and on y-axis you may have the annual occurrence rate or also the cumulative annual occurrence rate. There are different forms of this magnitude recurrence relationship. Sometimes you can plot this annual rate only, and you can also plot the cumulative annual rate. The most commonly used equation or model to describe the shape of this relationship is the well-known Gutenberg-Richter relationship. And we have seen already that as we increase the magnitude, the number of earthquakes reduce exponentially. So which means that if we plot the log of the number of events on y-axis, log base 10 of the number of events on y-axis, and if we plot it as a function of the magnitude, we are expected to get a straight line. So as you can see in the last slide also, if I go back, you can see here that in this example, the mean annual number of earthquakes or the mean rate of occurrence is on y-axis, and the y-axis is the log axis. So basically it is log of n of m on y-axis, and you can see here that it is a straight line. All the dots here are basically showing the historical data, the magnitude and their number coming from the historical data for this particular seismic source, and their trend is linear, you can see. So you can fit a straight line also in that data, and this will be having the form of log n of m equal to a constant minus another constant times the magnitude. This form of the equation is first proposed by Gutenberg and Richter, and therefore it is called the GR relationship or Gutenberg-Richter relationship. So this n of m is the average number of earthquakes per year having a magnitude greater than m. A and b are the constants. Obviously, if you have this line, b will be the slope of this line, b will be the slope of this line, and a will be the y-intercept. So this distance will be a. So they are conventionally obtained from an appropriate statistical analysis of historical earthquakes. So you actually plot all the actual dots for a particular seismic source. From the data you actually plot them and then fit a best straight line to calculate A and B. 10 raised to power A is the average number per year of earthquakes above magnitude 0, because this is height from this 0 level. It is the y-intercept. So therefore you can say that it is the average number of you can say earthquakes per year above magnitude 0. B describes the relative rate of occurrence of different magnitudes. It is the slope of this line. So it is telling you that what is the relationship of the rate of occurrence between different magnitudes. The value of B is typically in this range, 1 plus minus 0.3, but actually it depends on the historical records, the number of events for each magnitude. So you have to actually plot this curve. This process should be done for each of the seismic source, and then A and B should be extracted from that GR relationship. So A and B are also sometimes called as the seismic activity parameters for a particular source. And this process of constructing the magnitude recurrence relationship can also be performed for crustal faults also, because if you have this let's say the study area and you have this fault and all the earthquakes which are located on that fault, you can carry out the same exercise. You just count all the earthquakes in a particular buffer zone around that fault, which you think the seismicity is mainly governed by this fault, and then based on the number of earthquakes for different magnitudes, you can carry out this whole process to come up with A and B seismicity parameters for your fault. So A and B will be used to model that fault or any area source also in the PSHA process. So this form of this relationship, which is the Gutenberg-Richter relationship, has been verified from observations of seismicity throughout the world. So it is the most commonly used form of the equation, which can be used to describe the variation of different occurrences with respect to magnitude. So this has been tested or verified by observations around the world. So here you can see the same example. The GR relationship or the GR model is is drawn here. The straight line is the ideal Gutenberg-Richter relationship, and the dots are all the actual records, the data from the actual records. So you can see here that the mean annual number of earthquakes, as you expect, that they are reducing with increasing magnitude. And once they increase from a particular higher number, for example magnitude 8, the trend will not still be straight line. The trend will be like this, the trend of the actual data. So this dotted line is in fact the truncated Gutenberg-Richter model. So the solid line is the actual line from this equation, but the dotted line is actually capturing the actual variation for large magnitude earthquakes, their occurrences, and that is more realistic. That can be captured by the truncated Gutenberg-Richter relationship. So here you can just truncate the line, you can just cut it at any maximum magnitude which is experienced at that particular seismic source. So if a source have a maximum magnitude of maybe 8.5, we can just truncate the Gutenberg-Richter relationship at that magnitude, and therefore that truncated GR model will be used to model the seismicity of this particular seismic source. Some examples of calculating these seismicity parameters for the actual seismic hazard assessment. This is the same example from Pakistan. So here you can see that these are the deep area sources here. So this is the source zone 1, and for that source zone, this is the actual you can say magnitude recurrence relationship. The straight line, which is the red color, is the Gutenberg-Richter law, and the dots are actually the cumulative events having a magnitude greater than a particular number. So these dots are the actual discrete events. For example, if you just count them and you just see that the number of earthquakes which are having a magnitude 5, that is this one. So you can just check the number of events having a magnitude equal to 5. But for cumulative number of events, you have this line, and that line is following, almost following the Gutenberg-Richter relationship. So by having a best fit line from all of those dots, we can come up with the A value and also with the B value. And we can also see here that the maximum magnitude experienced here is 7.9 in this particular deep zone 1. In that case, we will just keep it up to 7.9, and after that we just truncate it. Similarly, for a shallow area source zone, here this is for shallow area 1. So this is this particular shallow area 1. This is the actual curve, actual magnitude recurrence relationship. So you can see here that now with this value of B, the fit is not accurate. You have to actually modify the value of B to actually capture all of this variation or this you can say distribution of the cumulative number of events for different magnitudes. Once you get the best relationship you can pick the seismicity parameters and then you can proceed to the next step of the PSHA process. This have to be repeated for each and every seismic source. It can be area source as well as it can be fault source. So another example, this is from the PSHA of Thailand. So all of this A, B, C are actually the area sources, and for each of the zone A, B, C and area source, you have this magnitude recurrence relationship. So on y-axis you have the frequency of occurrence, number per year. In fact, it is the log scale, so it is log of n of m. So log of n of m on y-axis, and on x-axis you have the magnitude. So you have to perform this for whole of the area sources as well as the fault sources. Some faults have an occurrence rate which may not follow the Gutenberg-Richter relationship. So some faults, the occurrence rate of large earthquakes deviate from that of what is predicted by the Gutenberg-Richter relationship. For these faults, you have another magnitude recurrence model, and that is the characteristic earthquake model. It can accurately represent the seismicity of that particular fault. So you can see here that this is a comparison of exponential. This is the exponential GR model, and the dotted line is the characteristic recurrence model. So if the actual data is showing you that the characteristic model can accurately capture the seismicity rate for that particular fault, then you may use this second model, or second you can say magnitude recurrence relationship for that particular fault. So some faults may have a tendency to produce roughly the same number of earthquakes for different magnitude range. So in that case, the line may be deviating from the actual GR relationship. So in that case, you use the characteristic earthquake model for the magnitude recurrence relationship. So you can see here that this is an example of the magnitude recurrence relationship for two of the seismic sources. So on y-axis you have the cumulative annual frequency, the last column of that example which I have shown, and on x-axis you have magnitude. So the actual dots or variation will be, you can say, they will be just spreading along the mean line, which is represented by the solid black line. So you may also have the 5th percentile or 95th percentile lines to actually quantify the uncertainty in the estimation of this magnitude recurrence relationship. Another example on the right hand side. So this figure shows not only the mean line but also the 5th percentile and 95th percentile. 5th percentile means that only 5% of the data is lower than this line, dotted line. And 95 means that only 5% of the data is more than or higher than this line, which is 95th percentile. The third step after you construct the magnitude recurrence relationship for all of the seismic source, the third step is the selection of the ground motion prediction equations or attenuation models. They are the same things, attenuation models or GMPs. And as we have discussed earlier also, that they are the relationships which tell us that how the ground motion or the hazard parameter, for example the peak ground acceleration, is reducing as we increase the source to site distance. So these attenuation relationships provide the means for estimating a strong ground motion parameter, for example PGA, from parameters of the earthquake, for example magnitude or source to site distance, faulting mechanism or local site conditions. So all of these information about the earthquake, they are used as an input in these relationships, and the output is the estimation of the ground motion parameter, for example PGA value. So a wide range of these empirical ground motion attenuation relationships are available, and they can be used as part of the PSHA process. But there are certain things which you should keep in mind while selecting the adequate ground motion attenuation relationships for your use. And the most important governing parameter for their selection is the a regional tectonic setting of site of interest, whether it is located within a stable continental region or an active tectonic region, or whether the site is in proximity to a subduction zone tectonic environment. So, which means that you may have several, you can say, tectonic setting or regional tectonic setting, and different GMPs are using the data from different settings, and therefore their equations or relationships are applicable to those tectonic environments only. So therefore you have to keep in mind the tectonic setting of your site, and then you should you can select the adequate ground motion prediction equation for your use. So that's how a GMP looks like, GMPE, that on x-axis you have the distance from the causative fault, and this distance can also be defined in different ways. One way can be that it is simply the distance from epicenter to the site, and another way can be that it is the distance from hypocenter to the site. So you have to keep the definition of this R in mind also. Generally it is the distance from the causative fault, but technically you have to keep in mind that it may have a different definition. For example, epicentral distance, hypocentral distance, for example. On y-axis you have the ground shaking intensity, which is represented by a ground motion parameter, for example PGA. So for different magnitudes, for different local soil classes or types, or for different faulting mechanisms of faults, you will have different lines. Here you can see that for magnitude 5 you have this line, 5.6, 6.1, 6.6 and 8.5. So R is defined here in this example as the epicentral distance. So since you already know the distance from the causative fault, and you also know the magnitude, for example, you fix it, you can use this relationship to actually calculate the peak ground acceleration expected at your site. So you can say that, for example, if R is 20 kilometers, so you can say here that an earthquake having a magnitude equal to maybe 6.6 will be able to produce the PG of 0.19 at my site, 0.19 G at my site. So this 0.19 is corresponding to an MR pair, or the magnitude and distance pair, where magnitude in this case is maybe 6.6 and R is 20 kilometer. So that's how you use this GMPE or attenuation model to come up with the peak ground acceleration at your site, given the earthquake parameters, for example magnitude and the distance. So these are the three major tectonic regions which I was using in last slide. That here first you have the active tectonic regions, which are shown here by this dots, the shaded with dots, and these are spread all along the world. You can see here spread along the main converging plate boundaries here in the west coast. Similarly you can have here South America. Here also you have a main converging plate boundary, the Himalayan belt. The second seismotectonic environment is the subduction zones. So here you can see Southeast Asia, and here also the subduction zone. And lastly you have the stable continental regions, for example this part, or maybe here for example Australia, Africa, middle of Africa. These are all the stable continental regions, and different GMPs are developed for these seismotectonic environments. For example, this table shows us the different attenuation relationships or GMPs proposed by different researchers for different regions and different tectonic environments. So for example, for Europe you have these and then you also have these GMPs. So the list is very long because their new versions or new GMPs are keep on coming as the new earthquake data is being recorded. So these are all the older generation of attenuation relationships, but now we have also the new GMPs. Sometimes the different international research organizations, they publish their GMPs and they keep on regularly updating them also. So generally the ground motion prediction equations, they are often represented by this form, that you have log of the ground motion parameter, for example PGA, but they can be others also, for example P ground velocity, spectral acceleration and the spectral displacement. But that is the dependent variable, and different other magnitude parameters and the source to site distance, the faulting mechanism and the local site conditions, they are used as independent variables and they will be used to calculate this Y. C1, C2 and all those constants, they are coming from the statistical analysis, and that statistical analysis is performed on a large database of past recorded earthquakes. So if you have, for example, this is the location of a particular epicenter, and if you have the seismic stations installed at different source to site distances, then you can check the PGA for the same earthquake event for the same magnitude. You can check the PGA recorded at different stations, and finally you come up with a curve where you know that the distance is on x-axis and the PGA value is on the y-axis. So as the distance is increasing, the PGA value is reducing. But this process is done for huge databases for different past earthquakes, and then finally, based on the statistical analysis, the final equation is proposed as the attenuation model. This epsilon here is the random error term with the mean of 0 and some standard deviation. It has the Gaussian probability distribution, and this term basically describes the variability in ground motion, because you know already that the actual historic data will be just spread along this line, and then you have to come up with best fit line which can capture this variation, and therefore you will always have an error because this is the random data and its distribution is approximately captured by the actual GMP which is proposed. So for example, here you can see two examples, Campbell 1981A and the Joyner and Boor. So these are the two ground motion prediction equations, and you can see the Campbell is represented with solid line for different magnitudes. You have the solid line and also you have the dotted line which is Joyner and Boor. So as we increase the distance, the peak ground acceleration is reducing. This is about the random error in the attenuation model. You can see here that the actual dots are coming from the actual data, and the red line is the mean value of the ground motion prediction equation. So this is the mean, but obviously the data which is used to actually come up with this mean line, the data will be above and below also, and that will be having the Gaussian probability distribution. So this error is captured through the epsilon term in the GMP. So the epsilon value is basically the random error in your GMP. Similarly, the source to site distance, which is on the x-axis of your GMP, this R may also have different definitions. For example, here you can see M1 up to M5. These are all the source to site distances, but they have different definitions. M1 here is the hypocentral distance. So this is the hypocenter of the earthquake, and right from there up to your station you have M1. Similarly, this M2 is the epicentral distance. So right from epicenter up to your site or station is M2. So these are two different definitions of the source to site distance, but there can be others also. For example, M3 is the closest distance to the center of the high energy release. This one, for example, here you have a high stress zone, although the rupture originally originated from this point hypocenter, but you have a high stress zone here within the rupture area, and it is the center of the high energy release. From that point, if you take the distance up to station, that will be M3. M4 here is the closest distance to the slip fault, and basically this is the rupture or slip. So the closest distance from the actual slip to your station is M4. And if you take the projection of that actual rupture or slip on the surface, so on surface from that point, so if the projection on the surface is this, so the closest distance from that projection to the station will be M5. So different definitions of source to site distances. So you have to check while using a GMP what definition of source to site distance that GMP actually use. So in GMPs also we know that okay, magnitude is one of the basic inputs. You have to if you want to use it, you have to fix the magnitude and then you can come up with the PGA value for a given source to site distance. So R and M are already we know, but there can be other input parameters. For example, one of them is the faulting mechanism, and that is often represented by the F factor in different GMPs. For different types of faults or different faulting mechanisms, you will have a different F factor. So the effect of faulting mechanism is considered in the GMP using this factor, and different attenuation relationships are compared here. You can see that for different equations the F factors are also given. This rack angle is defined here, and this will be different for different types of the you can say faults. When you have a slip and one block of land slip compared to the other block, there can be different kinds of slip terminology. For example, this A distance from here to here, that is the net slip, the total slip on the fault, because the fault can be having a lateral slip as well as dip slip. So it will be you can say a mix of uh, two different kinds of slips. One can be lateral slip and other kind can be just dip slip. So in this case A will be the net slip. This B will be in fact the actual dip slip. The actual slip may be the mix of strike slip and dip slip. So but the B part is B distance is the actual dip slip. C is the strike slip, the horizontal slip, and similarly D is the vertical throw. It is the amount by which the one part of the block or earth is has moved down compared to the other part. So D is the vertical throw, the vertical component of the total slip. E is the horizontal throw, the total horizontal component of the net slip. F here is actually the apparent horizontal component of the net slip. So here this one is the rack, and that is the slip direction of the hanging wall block measured in the fault plane and from the dip vector. So if this was your original point for foot wall, and the corresponding point on the hanging wall is this point, so and this green arrow is your dip angle, basically the fault plane. In that case this will be your rack, and for different kinds of mechanism this will be different. So the summary is that the actual faulting mechanism is also accounted for in the GMPs using the F factor, and that is here the different types of different faults. You may have different F factor here. So the next important parameter which is part of the GMP is the site condition, and we know that different building codes basically classify the sites based on the quality of soil or type of soil based on these site classes. Generally the A is hard rock and E is the soft soil, and we know already that the shear wave velocity in first 30 meter of the soil layer, which is also called as the VS30 value, is an important parameter which basically tells us the stiffness of the soil. So the hard rocks will have high VS30 value compared to the soft soils. So based on different ranges of the VS30 values, these site classes are defined by different building codes. So now this is how the attenuation relationship looks like. The coefficient C1, C2 up to C6 are normally determined by fitting the equation to the actual ground motion data. By applying the statistical regression analysis, you can come up with the best fit C1 up to C6 coefficients. This term represents the geometric attenuation of the seismic wave front as it propagates away from the earthquake source. But this term, because R is coming twice here, the second term is representing the an elastic attenuation that results from the material damping and scattering as the seismic waves propagate through the crust. So R basically have two effects, and they are quantified by different you can say coefficients or constants of regression. So this is an example of the ground motion database which can be used for developing an attenuation relationship. So you can see here that for one particular magnitude, because this will be just one earthquake event, you will have several dots which are recordings from different seismic stations which are located at different distances. So for each magnitude you will have different you can say readings from different seismic stations, and they will be located at different distances from the actual source. So all of these you can say as you go up you have different magnitudes. So all of these are the different earthquake events along the y-axis, and then you also have to perform different corrections and different other modifications and you can say processing to come up with the final database which can be used to actually plot the GMP, and then the statistical analysis can be performed to come up with the best fit line with different coefficients also. So here you can see an example of how the coefficients may look like. So you can see for different PGA value and the spectral acceleration values, the coefficient C1 up to C14 from this particular reference, they are shown here from this table, and this whole is for magnitude less than 6.5. So these kind of you can say tables for coefficients of regression are provided as part of the attenuation models, and then you can pick the coefficients from these tables and then use the equation. So for example here you can see for three different ground motion prediction equations or attenuation models for two different magnitudes, you can see the GMPs, or you can see the attenuation of the peak ground acceleration with increasing the rupture distance. So this is the actual example of the ground motion prediction equations. So for different magnitudes, for different focal mechanisms, for different site classes, the effect will be incorporated in the GMP equations. The last step is the development of the hazard curves for the site. So the first step was the seismic sources, identification of them and actually gathering the information about them. Second step was the magnitude recurrence relationship. You actually use the past historical data, instrumental data or information from paleoseismic studies to come up with the MR relationship for each seismic source. The third step was the GMPs, the selection of GMPs, and now last step 4 is the development of the hazard curve. So let's see that step. These are those 4 steps: seismic sources, then the magnitude recurrence relationship. For each seismic source you can plot that, then the selection of the attenuation model, and now we are at the last stage where we have to construct the probability of exceedance or annual frequency of exceedance as the function of the peak ground acceleration. So in last stage we will use that information from the GMR relationship as well as the GMPE. We basically use or combine the information from step 2 and step 3 to construct the hazard curve of our site. This is a curve which will have the probability of exceedance or the annual cumulative annual frequency on y-axis and the ground motion parameter on x-axis. So these are those 4 steps. So the idea is that we have already selected the attenuation model. So sorry, this is the attenuation model or GMPE, and we have the MR relationship already for each of the seismic source. Now what we will do is that we will start the process for the construction of hazard curve for our site by just selecting a PGA value. Let's say it can be 0.1 G, any number for the start of the process. And we also know the source to site distance. So we have, for example, this is our site and this is a particular fault or area source, whatever, source A. So we know already the distance from site to that source, so R is available. So we have already the source to site distance. So this number is available. We just select one PGA value and from that we can come up with the magnitude number by just having an interpolation between the different magnitudes from the GMP. So we can carry out the interpolation for M1 and M2 to come up with the magnitude corresponding to our PGA value and our source to site distance. So let's call it like M prime. Now using that M prime, we come to our magnitude recurrence relationship. So this is MR, so this is recurrence. Please don't confuse that R with this R. That R is the source to site distance. So we will bring that M prime here on this curve, and let's say that that M prime on that curve is somewhere here. So we will use that M prime, and using the MR relationship, we come up with this value, and that will be the cumulative annual frequency or annual rate of occurrence. We know already that that annual rate of occurrence or cumulative annual frequency can also be expressed as the probability of exceedance. So what we can do is that we can construct a new curve on which we have y-axis as the annual rate of exceedance or probability of exceedance, and on x-axis we have the PGA value, the starting PGA value. So let's say this number is, let's say, 0.002. So corresponding to 0.1 G and 0.002, we can come up with this 1 point on this curve. So this number can be 0.002. Obviously this can be converted into probability of exceedance also, but you can also keep it as the annual rate of exceedance also, or cumulative annual frequency also is the same thing. So this point here will be 0.1 G and this will be 0.002. So you will get 1 point on this curve. Similarly, you can repeat the process by selecting another PGA value, let's say 0.08 G, and then repeat the same process, use the GMPE on top and the magnitude recurrence on the bottom, and then come up with 1 point on this curve. So finally you plot all the important points on that curve by varying this starting PGA value, going down to a very low number up to a very high number, and therefore you will finally get this curve. That curve will tell you the level of hazard at your site corresponding to different definitions of hazard. For example, you can define a hazard definition as the earthquake with 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So you can convert this 10% probability of exceedance in 50 years into the annual rate of exceedance or probability of exceedance. So you already know the definition of your hazard when you have to use this curve, and then you can just pick the peak ground acceleration for corresponding to your definition. So for 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years, the number will be lower here and therefore the PGA will be higher. So that's how you will first construct the curve, and then it will be used to describe the complete picture of seismic hazard at your particular site. So this is the example of the hazard curves, and one important point here is that we can construct this curve for any ground motion parameter. Currently we are considering only the peak ground acceleration, but there is another important ground motion parameter which is called the spectral acceleration. We will cover that in next session, but the idea is that for any ground motion parameter, the hazard curve can be plotted because the GMPE is available for any hazard parameter. So you have seen here that the definition of GMPE, the general form was log y is equal to some functions of the magnitude and distance and faulting mechanism, etc. So this y can be PGA, but it can also be spectral acceleration and some other important ground motion parameters, and that we will discuss in next session. So here you can see in some example hazard curves which are having the annual frequency of exceedance on y-axis and the peak ground acceleration or spectral acceleration on x-axis. So the curve can be plotted for any hazard parameter. So this hazard curve will be different for different sources, and you will also combine them to get one final hazard curve. So you can see here that these lines can be from different sources, and they will tell you the relative contribution of different sources in the final hazard value. So for example, you can see here that if this is source 1 and this is source 2, so the source 1 is not contributing much in lower PGA values, but after the PGA has increased from 0.2 G, for example, the source 1 increased from source 2, which means that this particular source have a tendency to produce you can say high magnitude earthquakes which are capable of producing large PGA values at your site compared to source 2. But the source 2 has more annual frequency of exceedance for lower PGA values. So for low level of earthquakes, source 2 is governing, but for high level of earthquakes, source 1 is governing. So, but you can also plot a combined hazard curve which will be having the contribution from all of the seismic sources, and that should be used for the purpose of structural analysis or for performance assessment of buildings. So with this I will end this session here, and in the next session we will see an actual example with some calculations of this whole process of the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. So till then, stay safe and thank you.